Shalom, and welcome to the History of the Land of Israel podcast. I am Shaiel Ben-Ephraim, and I welcome you to the one podcast with the guts to survey the most provocative historical narrative in the world. Episode 2, The Land Itself. Another defining element in the climate of the Land of Israel is water, or lack thereof. Now, in relation to Jordan and Sinai, Israel is a temperate and bountiful land, but these differences should not be exaggerated, especially in comparison to many northern countries like Canada or Sweden. The land is roughly 60% desert, and as mentioned, drought could be a severe problem, and rainfall when it occurs can also be dangerous and unpredictable. Serious flooding can occur in the same spot as soon as drought ends, and this particularly happens in the desert areas. The crucial importance of water and rainfall is clear from the contours of local religions. The deities of Canaan, Greece, and even the Israelite God are associated with rain-giving ceremonies. From prehistoric times, the locals built irrigation canals from brooks and streams, wells and aqueducts, and rain-collecting cisterns. The aqueduct of Caesarea, built by the Emperor Hadrian, was the most spectacular of these ancient systems until Israel completed the national water carrier in 1964. The methods of the ancient times are still employed in Israel today and in Palestine as well, albeit with increased sophistication. Now, despite being a small area, the land of Israel has significant geographic divides. And they have sharp divisions between them that have often influenced the cultures that arose in each one. One geographer wrote, Israel is best described as a series of parallel lines of divergent terrain extending from north to south. You can divide the land of Israel into 10 distinct ecological zones using this method. Here is a complete list. The Upper Galilee, the Lower Galilee, the Hula Valley, the Jordan Valley, the Jezreel Valley, Samaria, the Judean foothills, the northern coastal plain, the southern coastal plain, and the Negev. One of the main differences between the zones is the amount of rainfall in each. The Negev receives about 2 inches of annual rain. The Judean mountains, right nearby, receive about 24 inches, and the Galilee gets a bountiful 40 inches per year. Temperature differences are sharp as well. The Jordan Valley routinely sees temperatures above 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, the Galilee rarely sees temperatures in the 90s and experiences snow on a fairly regular basis. I won't go into all the details of each one of these 10 subsectors, but let's look at some of the major groupings of areas. The coastal area is important and distinct from the rest of the country. It's the area nearest the Mediterranean, of course. It's a plain typified by the presence of sand dunes. The coastal plains are only roughly 12 miles wide. They have seasonal riverbeds across them, which the Arabs call wadis. The coastline itself is dotted with natural coves. This combination of factors led to the existence of swamps. Indeed, until the Romans drained them, large parts of the area were uninhabitable. Zionist pioneers completed that job 2,000 years later. Therefore, until the 20th century, the coastal region was nowhere near as suitable for agriculture and for large population support as it is today. Over the years, it has encouraged the coastline a very different type of culture from the inland, often more cosmopolitan and seafaring, as coastal areas usually are. The current cultural and political divide between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv is typical of that traditional split, and anyone who's visited Israel and sees conservative Jerusalem versus more liberal Tel Aviv knows what I'm talking about. To the east of the coast is a series of footholds known as the Shephelah, or Shfela. They contain fertile valleys and receive an amount of rainfall similar to the coast. Now, in opposition to the coast has often stood the central highlands. This small mountain system extends from south of Jerusalem into the Galilee. It has broad valleys, such as the Jezreel and Bet She'an, and provides transportation conduits that have eased and facilitated the trade that has been so important for the land of Israel over the years. In ancient times, the central highlands were more central than today. They received more rainfall, and there was no irrigation to transfer it elsewhere, and was more comfortable for living since it was far away from swamps and the accompanying malaria. Farming was mainly executed in the central highlands through a system of terraces that proved quite effective. It is no coincidence that Jerusalem rose to its political, cultural, and military importance in earlier periods, and today lags behind in Tel Aviv now that trade from abroad plays a larger role and irrigation is easier, and of course swamps have been dried out. Lifestyle in these parts of the country was based on olives. There was no other source of oil here in ancient times. Butter or lard could not be preserved in the hot climate. Therefore, olives were used for cooking, lighting, soaps, ointments, etc. And it continues to be an important part of the lifestyle of Palestinians living in the West Bank today. Therefore, it was, due to its diversity, it was a desirable commodity in Mesopotamia. Olives are rare over there. And one of the major things that we could offer Mesopotamians in exchange for the many goods that they produced over there were olives. Now, moving further east, we get the higher mountains of Judea and Galilee, stretching into the Golan. The Galilee receives the most rainfall of any area in the country. The lower Galilee has small hills and valleys. Meanwhile, the upper Galilee has steeper hills and deeper rivers. The rainfall collected in the area centers on the Sea of Galilee, or what Israelis call the Kinneret, a sweet water body that remains a central source of water in the region. Further east, the Galilee turns into the Golan Heights, the highest mountains in the country. The Galilee, as anyone who has visited knows, provides some of the most beautiful scenery in the country. In the upper Galilee, mountains rise to 2,000, 3,000 feet, and from Tzfat, Safed, one can look down over 3,000 feet downward into the sea below. However, the wild terrain in those areas was inhospitable to government control and military operations in ancient times. Therefore, for much of the history we will survey, the Galilee served as the backwoods of the country. Bandits lived there, and persecuted minorities sought refuge there, which is why the Druze and Cherkessians have often made their homes in that area as opposed to other parts of the country. A unique part of the country is the Jordan Valley. It marks the border between modern Israel and Jordan, and it's a valley divided by the Jordan River. It sits between the Judean and Jordanian mountains. The river leads into the Dead Sea, adjacent to the Judean desert. Of course, the Dead Sea is the lowest spot in Israel, and the lowest land-based elevation in the world. It is more than 9 times saltier than the ocean and allows you to float on the surface effortlessly. The Jordan River is the only perennial river in the land of Israel and runs right through it. However, it should be noted, it is nowhere near as impressive as the Bible would have us think. The Jordan Valley is part of a much broader regional rift. How broad? It extends from Turkey all the way to South Africa. The 6,000-mile rift is sometimes known as the Great Syria-African Rift. Now, moving on to the Negev. The Negev dominates the south of the country and is the biggest area. Much of it is arid, but some of it is only semi-arid and allows for some limited agriculture. How dry are parts of the Negev? Well, in Eilat, it only rains once every few years. The southern Negev has no arable land at all. However, it is rich in minerals, such as the copper of Timna, which would form the basis of some of the earliest civilizations in the southern part of the country. Most of the Negev is a mountainous plateau. However, there's 3 desert craters that have been caused by erosion. The most famous one is Machtesh Ramon, which was caused by volcanic eruptions hundreds of millions of years ago. Now, the existence of the Negev is a bit of geopolitical misfortune for the kingdoms, city-states, and modern states that have tried to defend the land of Israel. It serves as an easy way to traverse into the country and has allowed access for invaders all the way back from the domination of Egypt thousands of years ago to the invasion of Egyptian tanks in 1948. some things don't change. Now, why does all this matter? This is not a geographic podcast, of course, but geography has had an essential role in shaping early societies in this land. The land of Israel was exceptionally diverse for such a small territory. So while you can ski in the peaks of the Golan Heights, you roast on the beach in the sweltering heat of the Gulf of Aqaba. Therefore, different social structures and societies could flourish in any area, yet they could prove unsuitable for the other areas. And we start to see those splits from the nomadic era, where some nomads took the north as their area, and they often had to wander 300 to 500 kilometers in order to make it and find their food. But the nomads that lived in the deserts of Judea and the Negev had to travel much further. They would cover 500 to 2,000 kilometers. Their food was different, their traditions were different, and their needs were different. So you could already see social differences in migratory bands that early on. Fundamental in the biblical era is the cleavage between the lowlands and the highlands. Now for nomads, they would sometimes switch from one to the other, depending on the season of the year. Winters were best passed in the warmer lowlands. Meanwhile, summers saw many move to the cooler highlands. These regional differences, which would allow different cultures to blossom. If a group could find their regional niche, they could survive without being part of the dominant culture. And that's one of the reasons the dominant cultures in the land of Israel were usually weaker than in other places like Anatolia, like Egypt, and like Mesopotamia. In his classic study, M.W. Prausnitz explained the following. The remarkable success of the Mesolithic and Neolithic cultures in Israel and Jordan was apparently helped by the proximity of totally different climatological areas, Mediterranean, semi-arid, and arid, providing ecological niches where new cultures could strike roots and adjust. At the same time, old cultures were able to survive and modify their way of life to the prevailing physical environment. That should help you understand how some cultures, like the Druze, like the Jews, and the Sumerians, have managed to preserve their cultures for thousands of years, when in other countries they would have been assimilated into the dominant culture. If so, now we have some idea of how the land has shaped cultural and political developments. We can see the origins of some of the cultural differences between Israelis and, dare I say, Americans today. For those living in the land of Israel, security and building a large and strong state has been a constant problem. You have invaders coming in from every angle. You have people who want to exploit the resources of the country and pass from one to the other. Building up a mechanism that can fend off invasions and incursions has always been the highest need of those living in the land of Israel. Meanwhile, for Americans, their heritage is of emancipation from what they saw as an authoritarian British imperial government. That's one clue, although there are many others, as to why a strong government is heavily valued in the Levant, while individual freedom is at the forefront in the United States. So this is our first clue that societies and cultures in the land of Israel are vastly different and shaped in very different ways from those in the United States and in other Western countries. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. In the next episode, we will begin the story of the people who lived in the land of Israel and unpack all these themes. So see you next time on the History of the Land of Israel podcast.